Meantime, Indonesia says reports of Australian spies targeting Indonesian officials during a trade dispute with the United States are mind-boggling. Foreign Minister Martina Talagawa made the comment after visiting U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in Jakarta. The report was published in the New York Times on Sunday, quoting documents leaked by U.S. intelligence fugitive Edward Snowden. It said Canberra offered to share the information it had obtained with Washington to give it leverage in the dispute. Dr. Marty says it's difficult to link Indonesia's trade ties with the United States with Australia's security. Our Indonesia correspondent Deviante Fareeds has more.
Neighbors should be looking out for another, not turning against one another. We should listen to one another, then listen in to each other. That's Martina Talagawa's comments over the recent wiretapping allegations. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry responded that the U.S. take these revelations very seriously. President Obama has laid out some concrete and substantial reforms about preserving privacy and preserving national security. He also reiterated that the U.S. doesn't collect intelligence to gain leverage in trade issues.
At the news conference, Mr. Kerry also said that the future stability of the Asia-Pacific region depends on the success of negotiating an ASEAN Code of Conduct on maritime claims. Deviante again with more.
Discussions over the potential conflict in the South China Sea was discussed between Kerry and Marty during an informal dinner last night. Kerry said that he discussed these matters, maritime issues, with Beijing during his recent visit to China. He says that international law applies to all countries, and China has to resolve the territorial disputes peacefully and in line with the UN law of the sea. The region's stability depends on the existence of a code of conduct to be ratified. The U.S. has been increasingly uneasy at what it sees as China's effort to gain control over the waters in the Asia-Pacific region, including its declaration last November of an air defense identification zone known as ADIZ in an area of the East China Sea.
And that's our Deviante Fareeds. And for more, we're joined by Dr. Nazia Baffin from the School of the Arts and Media at the University of New South Wales. She's speaking to us from Sydney. So, Dr. Nazia, what do you make of this latest leak on Australia spying on its neighbour as Secretary Kerry visits? Is this intended to draw the U.S. into the fray?
Well, Annalisa, revelations of this kind would be damaging at any time to bilateral ties between Australia and Indonesia. It's particularly damaging coming so closely on the heels of previous revelations of spying by Australia, the wiretapping of President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono's phone, the phone of his wife, and it's also particularly damaging coming during the visit, as you say, of the US Secretary of State. So at any time at all, this sort of thing would put Australia-Indonesia relations under a bad light. But the fact that it has happened now is possibly the worst time that this sort of revelation could have come up for Mr. Abbott, remembering that he's only been the Prime Minister for 5 months, and in that 5 months the media here has really portrayed him to have damaged relationships with Indonesia, given these issues of wiretapping, but also given the clashes that he's run into with his Indonesian counterpart, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, over the question of boat people turning back the boats to Indonesia. So he's not perceived as a successful Prime Minister in terms of managing the relationship with Indonesia, which is seen as an important relationship. But these revelations really have added a nail to the coffin of his legacy in this area.
Damaging to diplomatic ties. How does it affect the business climate between the two neighbors?
We've already seen, Annalisa, threats of retaliation from the Indonesian side. There have been threats to cut back on a very important industry that takes place between Australia and Indonesia, and that is the live export trade. So from the Indonesian side, they've made those threats because obviously from the Indonesian side, they're perceiving a lack of respect from Australia and from Australia's government. So we've already seen that particular side of things. The Australian dollar has actually weakened in recent months against comparable currencies, and so we're seeing threats again from Indonesia to cut back on another important area of trade with Australia, and that is the education sector. Indonesia provides a sizable amount of students every year to the international education market in Australia, which is a very important one. So we're already seeing some negative effects of these revelations. I think these effects could have been they could have been mitigated to a certain extent by Mr. Abbott's reaction, but his reaction to the Indonesians seems very stubborn. A lot of the spying revelations concern the previous administration, which was a different party to Mr. Abbott's. And so Tony Abbott reacted, I think, in a way that, didn't really solve the problem. If he had stood up and said, look, guys, this actually happened this didn't happen on my watch, this happened during the previous administration, and we'll make sure that this doesn't happen again, that could have improved things substantially. Instead, he's being perceived by the Indonesians as stubborn, and also somebody who is, determined to sort of fumble his way through this.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that update, Dr. Nazia. That was Dr. Nazia Bafen from the University of New South Wales.